Okay, well, let's make a start in our reading journey. What is it that you do when you read? Take just a second to think about this. What is it that you do? Well, probably you have one or two responses. If you were to ask your own pupils, or your fellow students, or your relatives, you might get a number of answers. And here are some of the answers that you might be getting. For example, literature is something that you consume. It's simply something like food. You eat it and it's gone. Another explanation might be, well, literature is something that simply happens to you. Het overkomt je in Dutch. Another thing someone might say is, well, literature is really something you can only understand if you know what the author's life was like. And on and on and on. As you can see, I have quite a few options on this sheet here. Most of these responses are true and quite fitting and appropriate for certain situations. If you are like the man on the bench, lying down with a book on your face, you might actually add one and say, reading is to shade the eyes while sleeping. But you are future masters of English. And in order to become a master of English, you have to become professional readers. What does that mean? It means there are certain things that you need to know. There are certain things you need to avoid. And we'll start with two very important ones. To begin with, well, these are the two important ones, but to begin with, I need to tell you, reading is something you need to do very actively. It's an activity. There are two major pitfalls that occur with reading and people reading. The first one is one we call affective fallacy. The affective fallacy really means that you evaluate fiction on the basis of how it makes you feel. I'm sure you've heard pupils say, oh, I hate that book. It's too depressing. It's a bad book. Well, professional readers of literature do not judge literature by how it makes them feel. The next one is intentional fallacy. A lot of people think that the only way you can really get something out of a text is if you know what the author wanted to say, what the author had in mind. But of course we never can. For one thing, even if we heard an interview with an author, the author might say, I wanted to do this or that, but then perhaps the author didn't achieve that. So intentions of the author are out of the window. We cannot know them, and if we can know them, perhaps he or she did not manage to do that. One other thing, very, very important distinction that we need to learn to make when we become professional readers. It's a big part of what we concentrate on. Who is telling me what? In order to do so, we have to distinguish between three things, and we'll be getting back to this a bit more during later lectures. The narrator. The narrator is our storyteller, the person who tells us what happens in a story. Never confuse the narrator with an author. The author creates a narrator and can do very tricky things by creating that narrator. In addition, we have something called the persona. A persona is not necessarily the same as the narrator. A persona is the voice we hear underneath everything in a text. The persona can be different from the narrator, can also be quite different from the author. Once again, the persona is not the same thing as the author. The persona is created by the author, and with a particular thing in mind. Finally, we have the author. The author in olden days would be putting a quill to parchment. In more recent days, would have used an old-fashioned typewriter, and today might be writing his book on a laptop or even on an iPad. That is the person who is drawing all the strings, the person who is creating what you are reading. So much for now.